Hi, I'm Ginny Myers Sain. I'm the author of One Last Breath. This is a dark and twisty thriller with just a hint of the paranormal. It's a story about Truly, who's grown up in a small town in Florida that's haunted by a gruesome set of murders that happened there decades ago. And when Rio, who's also obsessed with the killings out at Hidden Glen Springs, blows into that same town, the two girls team up to try to find the answer to the crime. But in the end, they end up caught in the sights of a serial killer. So this is a story about small town secrets and tangled roots. It's a story that explores the intense connection we feel when we meet someone for the first time and we're immediately drawn to them and we don't know why. And then it's a story that asks the question, how many times would you be willing to die for someone you loved? It's also a book about growing up and the difficulty of claiming your life as your own so you can forge your own path as you move forward. This story was partly inspired by two true crime cases. The first of those was the infamous Girl Scout murders that took place in Oklahoma, near Tulsa, where I grew up. And when I was a kid, I was fascinated and horrified by what happened at Camp Scott. And I knew when I started to write this story that I wanted to include that true crime element. I wanted to explore what it means to grow up in the shadow of a really famous tragedy. This book was also partly inspired by the crimes of Danny Rolling in Gainesville, Florida in the early 90s. The victims of his murders were mostly college students. And at the time, I was a high school student, but I was getting ready to go to college in a few years. So those murders really affected me and had a big impact on my life at that particular point. And so this story was also inspired by my love of the Florida springs. We have beautiful, deep freshwater springs here in the central part of the state where I live. And I had fallen in love with those springs years ago, actually before I even moved to Florida. And I knew someday that I wanted to set a story there. They're just beautiful, wild, untamed places. And I also knew I wanted to incorporate the idea of free diving, which means diving without a tank or any oxygen of any kind. And that seemed like such an exciting but dangerous and claustrophobic thing to do that I knew I wanted to add that dangerous element into the story. So the tension in this story comes from the wildlife that lives there in the big tangled Florida interior, both the humans and the animals, because alligators and serial killers are a lot alike. They're both silent predators. They're both extremely deadly, and you would never know that they were coming for you. So that's kind of the inspiration and the story behind One Last Breath. I'm going to read you just a little bit here. This is the opening chapter. Chapter 1. Usually it's the soft sound of the knife that wakes me, the noise it makes when it slices through the canvas like a whisper. I roll over to ask Celeste what it was she said, but she can't answer because she's already dead, staring and bloody. So I run. Other times when I imagine myself as Bailey, it's the crunch of leaves or the snap of a twig that makes me sit straight up in my sleeping bag. I stare into the dark, not realizing that the rest of my life can be measured in minutes. Even in my dreams, though, that night always ends the same way, with me dead, floating on the surface of the spring. I fade into blackness, my hair spreading out around me in a sea of blood, without ever knowing that Celeste and I have just become the most famous citizens of Mount Orange, Florida. But then I wake up, take a deep breath, hear the hum of the air conditioner. I count the old glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, and I feel the softness of clean sheets against my skin. I inhale the mountain breeze dryer sheets my mother uses, even though neither of us have ever seen a mountain in real life. Every time I'm hit with this rush of relief, because I'm not Bailey, and I'm not Celeste either. I'm Truly. And instead of bleeding out in the water right now, I'm standing on the courthouse lawn while the high school choir sings a memorial song for two long-buried girls who have always felt more alive to me than any of the people standing here, dripping in the late May heat. So that's how True and Rio's story starts. I hope that you will pick up a copy of One Last Breath and read to find out how it ends.